Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing an important video. I know I've created some videos on components, how do you need to go ahead and create them, some of the ways in which you actually need to create them, and then I've obviously have a design system video which involves a lot of components. But I don't think I've really talked about in detail why you should create these components in the first place. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I actually have questions like these coming in on the comments, and I'm going to put them in front of the screen. So why does it matter? Isn't it the end result the most important aspect? I don't get it. If you're coding it, there is absolutely no need of doing these roast me if needed. So this is about like components and why we need to go ahead and create components. Not gonna lie, I hate making components. I code it really. I do not need it. Prefer spending time on VS Code, and then business just cares about the end product. I'm not to flex on other UX designers. So again, questions like these, like I'm guessing probably we may have other questions or concerns as to why someone should go ahead and spend that much time on creating a component library or a design system if they can just go ahead and create the product and just deliver it, and that's all. Well, if you're working on really small projects, maybe, just maybe, you can do something like that. I still wouldn't recommend it, and here are just some of the reasons why I personally would not recommend it. So the first point that I'd like to point to is speed. So imagine you're actually in a design system. I'm going to delete this. Like, this is actually a file that I created for another client. It has a dashboard. I'm actually experimenting with a few things here, and this project is done, and it's not behind an NDA, so I can share it. So imagine I actually want to go ahead and use a button in, let's say, any of the other screens that I want to have, for example, in this screen or whatever. You know what I do right now? I can just go ahead and I can obviously just copy paste this if I want, or I can just press option 2 and then say button. And that's it. That's all I need to actually have the buttons appear on the left, the ones that I want to use. So here is a button. And I can then go ahead and I can do tons of things with it. Like I can say, okay, this shouldn't be a link style, it should be a primary style, or it should be a success, or it should be a warning, or it should be whatever. So I can do a lot of those things primarily because I've created these button styles. I can easily now go ahead, imagine if I wanted to say that this should actually be a danger button. It shouldn't be, again, a sorry, it shouldn't be again a primary button. I can say, okay, sure, it's going to be a danger button, and that's it. That's all I need to do. Now imagine if you wanted to do something like that. How would you go about doing that if you did not have components? You're probably going to go ahead, you're going to go to the colors. Imagine this wasn't a component, so I'm just going to detach it. So here I've detached it. I'm going to say, okay, I'm now going to go to my colors. I'm going to see which color to use, so on and so forth. But why do you have to go through so much effort to actually just change one thing? If you've decided that there are some styles that you need to create, just create them, so it's much easier to do so. Imagine even if you did it for this one instance, imagine you had 50 different files, 50 different pages in which this needed to be replaced. Are you going to go ahead and manually change the color of all of those pages? Like, that's insane, right? So again, it definitely helps your speed when you're actually designing pages, even though it's going to again slow you down at the start, but it's going to really help you if you keep on designing pages. If you need to access, let's say I want to access the input fields, right? I obviously have a text reader with label. I can just say, okay, this is a text reader with label. I want to stack it vertically. I can just do that. I want it small size. I can do that too. I don't have to go ahead and copy paste it from somewhere else. If I've created it in a separate page, I don't have to find for it. It's already in the component library on the left. So it really saves a lot of speed. So for example, I want to access the accordions, I have it here. I want to access the alerts, I have them here. I can obviously go ahead and just access them. Similarly, I can go ahead and change whether it's a toast, whether it's a banner, what the color it is, and so on and so forth. I can do a lot of things here. Similarly, for example, if I want to use the attachment box, I can do that. I can easily just drag it and save tons of time. So that's one. The other thing is reusability. Obviously, since you have all of these components that you've created, you can definitely start using them on in the file itself. You can reuse them, and obviously the same single button is actually being linked, so it's really easy to just reuse it in different pages. And not only that, if you publish this design system, if I go ahead and let me just go ahead and see if it's published. It's not really published, but if you were to publish it, I'm not going to publish it because it takes some time, but if you were to publish this design system, you're going to go into a completely separate file. You would still have access to all of the components that you've created here if you've published them. So you can use these components in, let's say, 50 different files on 50 different pages within those files. Now just imagine my first point about speed. If these weren't linked to a single button component, how are you going to make sure that these stay consistent? Are you going to go every time you create a new file, every time you create a new design, are you just going to go back and just copy paste that button and make sure, enforce that no changes happen, that there's not going to be any deviation? I mean, that's just a lot of work, right? Even if you go ahead and manually change something, how are you going to remember what particular state that button was in originally? So imagine if I go here in a file, maybe I've made some mistakes. I've actually manually given some padding here. Sorry, I've manually given some padding here. Sorry, I'm actually going to give some padding here. So manually given some paddings, it's hardly noticeable, or maybe let's do something like that, and then some here. Imagine this wasn't really a component. How would you make sure that this actually reverts back to its original state? Am I now going to go to a completely different file, see how this particular button was used in some of the other files? No, man. I'm actually just going to go ahead and do reset all overrides, and it's just going to reset them. If it's going to reset them, now if I actually go ahead and enable the icon on the left, that's going to be no problem. So I can just enable the icon on the right, I can enable the icon on the left, and I can just go ahead and do whatever it is that I was doing. So that's the second thing. It's reusability, maintenance, consistency, so on and so forth. Now, the third point I'd like to highlight is it actually has a close to reality feel. So imagine if I'm actually opening this prototype. This is a prototype. And now if I, let's say, hover over these items, do you know how this hover state is working? It's primarily working because of the design system. Hover states affects, like for example, what it's going to look like when I actually hover over these things. And I can even have, let's say, a lot of complexity in the components if they are components and I've linked their variants together. I've actually done videos on accordions. I've done videos on variants that checkboxes or whatever. Like, I've done a lot of videos on components and variants. Even like, again, carousels. I've done a video on carousels as well. You can actually have multiple carousels within the same page by just linking that carousel component together without necessarily linking a lot of those things. Actually, let me see if I can open that. So this is the one. How would you do something like that if you haven't created components? And how would you go ahead and actually share that with the developer and explain it to him like, this is how it's going to work? If you're not going to create components, if you're not going to create variants, if you're not going to link them, how will you let him know that this is going to be the effect? Are you just going to visually describe it to him? I've created this one component and I can now obviously have this multiple times in different pages if I want. That is exactly what you want for yourself as well. So that's really important. The other thing I'd like to highlight is, obviously, apart from the close to reality feel, it's really, again, tells you what the exact experience is going to be like, or close to the exact experience. And it's obviously very helpful for developers as well to see the animations. Developers aren't really going to think about the animations when you actually supply the files to them. I myself am a front-end developer, but I don't think about these interactions and transitions and everything when I actually go to code them. No, a lot of the times when I actually have my have these, again, client projects and freelance projects or whatever they are, I need to go ahead and show the client and actually impress the client with some of the animations, some of the transitions, and basically, again, explain how these things are going to work without just a dull. Imagine if you just have a dull design and there are no interactions or no transitions and it doesn't really even feel like a real prototype. I don't think that's going to be as powerful as something that's, again, very visual. It allows the user to actually interact with it, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of things there as well. So again, that's really helpful. And you won't be able to do that if you don't use components. You would otherwise, for example, what I've done here, imagine all of these hover states. You would basically have to create a different frame and then link each of these to a different frame and then change the hover states there, and you would have to do that individually for each of these different items. But since I've created components for them, I just have a single component. I can link that single component. Actually, let me just show you how I've done this thing so you can see. So here we have the sidebar. I'm just going to go to this particular item. As you can see, I just have these three items. I've mentioned that if I hover this thing, this is gonna be shown. It's gonna change its state from this to this, and that's it. I don't need to create a lot of different frames just to show this interaction for, let's say, 50 or 1,000 elements. I can just create one, and that effect is being duplicated on any instances that it contains. So that's the other thing. It has a very close to reality feel. Now control. I mean, I'm not even sure why people are asking this thing. Now, imagine if you had, like, imagine if you had, let's say, 50 different pages and 50 different files, right? Now you're going to go ahead and the client says, hey, we really don't like this blue color, or we really don't like this color. Please go ahead and change this color. Or maybe he says, I think this font size should be smaller. Let's say, what's the font size right now? It's 14, right? Now imagine if he says, I want this font size to be 12 on all of the different 50 pages within this file, and also on the, let's say, 10 different files that have, let's say, another 50 pages. How are you going to go ahead and do that if you haven't created components for these? How will you do that? Currently, how I'm going to do that is I'm just going to go to the main component. Here's the main component. I can obviously just go ahead and change it here, but since I've actually created a base variant, I'm going to go here and I'm going to say this particular text is not going to be 14. It's actually going to be, let's say, 10, or whatever the client actually asks me to, or whatever I think is going to be suitable for this case. And now if I actually see all of my buttons, they actually have a 10 pixel text. I don't really need to go ahead and change that individually on all of these screens. It saves me time. It's not about what the business user actually expects at the end. Some of the points that I'm actually mentioned above, for example, the close to reality field, that's for from the business perspective. But even you yourself, this is going to save you tons of time if you actually just go ahead and add a single component to control. Otherwise, you would have to go ahead and manually change all of those components, all of those variants manually by yourself, and that's just insane. That's just an insane amount of work. Even if I had to do it on this particular page, imagine on just one page. Now we're talking about 500 pages, right? For example, if you have 50 files with 50 pages, and sorry, 50 frames, that's like 500 frames. But even if you just had 50 frames, right? Now if I wanted to change this font size of all the buttons here, I would have to individually go ahead and select them, and basically select these ones as well, and just imagine doing that for, let's say, 50 different, I don't know, like files or even frames within the same file. I mean, how can you do something like that? That's like torture on yourself. So don't torture yourself. Again, do it the right way. So that's the other thing about control. So you can easily change them, you can easily modify the states, you can easily change the colors, you can change the border radius. And a lot of the time that happens, maybe the client doesn't really like the border radius, or he doesn't like the color, or he doesn't like the font or the spacing or anything along those lines, or maybe you yourself don't like them. You have to do something like this in order to be able to work quickly. So that's the other thing. And then the last thing, obviously, that I'd like to point out is the prototyping. So imagine, and I think I actually created a video for this, but I'm just going to quickly demonstrate what I mean by the prototyping on this screen as well. Prototype. So imagine you have a sidebar, right? I'm just going to say 1, and let's just go ahead and actually say this is 1, this is 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, and then 4, and then let's say this is going to be 5. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create 5 frames here. So 1, and let's just make it extremely big, even bigger. Okay, so this is going to be our frame 1, this is going to be our frame 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is going to be 2, this is going to be 3, this is going to be 4, and this one will be 5. Now imagine I actually wanted to create a sidebar like this, where I can click on 1, it's going to take me to 1, I can click on 2, it's going to take me to 2, I can click on 3, it's going to take me to 3, and then 4, and then 5. Now imagine if I were to do that without creating components of this, I would basically have to, again, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to cut it, I'm going to paste it here, and then I'm going to individually link all of these to these. So okay, 1 is going to be linked to 1, 2 is 2, 3 is 3, 4 is 4, and 5 is 5. And then if I copy this here, I would have to repeat that process again, since it's not a component, right? It's not a component. I can't really do that quite easily. But if I just do that on the outside, if I, for example, just go here, I create a component here, and I'm going to say 1 is going to be linked to 1, 2 is going to be linked to 2, 3 is going to be linked to 3, 4 is going to be linked to 4, and then 5 is going to be linked to 5. Now imagine if I have this as a component. I'm basically just creating a sidebar just to explain the concept. Obviously, you can do it in different ways if you want. So imagine you have something like this here as well. I'm going to copy and then just paste, paste, and then paste here, and then paste here. So now if I just basically run this prototype again, now if I click on 2, it's taking me to 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now if I want to change this sidebar, I want to, let's say that I actually want this sidebar to be, let's say, these things to actually be, let's say, some other types of buttons. I can go ahead and I can, you know what the problem is here as well. So imagine I did that. I'm going to say, okay, all of these should actually be, let's say, blue in color. So I have to then go ahead and select all of these to make them blue. Otherwise, if this individual element was also a component, I could just go to the single one and I can say this should be blue. So even here, even if I created the larger component, if I created the single smaller one, that would have been much better. But I guess you get the point. So again, it really helps you link all of these things. It's again much easier to work with. You can change the styles globally. And I've already mentioned tons of different points about the prototyping as well. Again, it is very close to reality and all of that stuff. So please, 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 if you're creating your designs, if you're providing anything to the client, please, even if it's just, let's say, a 2 or 3 or a 5 or a 10-page project, or it just has 10 screens or 5 screens or anything, then please go ahead and create the components. If, for example, by chance you just need to present the client one screen, even then I would recommend creating components, because you can show all of the close to reality stuff that I was talking about previously, which you can't really show without components that easily. So those are my recommendations on why you should use components. And please, I hope that I don't get any other comments about like we shouldn't really use components, or again like it's a drag and stuff along those lines. I hope this clarifies a bunch of your questions, and I think that's going to be pretty much it. Do subscribe, to hit the bell icon, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.